The TeraFlex JK Nebo roof rack incorporates OEM aesthetics and styling with rugged performance in a purpose-built configuration that will give you capacity to extend your adventures even further. So let's start by removing the hardtop. We'll skip the details in an effort to just minimize the sheer boredom of this easily accomplished task. Let's start on the right front, just behind the passenger seat, and unzip the padding at the crossbar and remove the 4 bolts that hold the satellite antenna mounting plate. Use a 13mm. Flip the bracket over and remove the mounting bolt. Use a 10mm. Pull back the padding at the door post and you will discover an attractive yellow antenna connector. Disconnect it by squeezing the release and pulling. I used my trusty Leatherman pliers to gently squeeze the release. It made removal much easier. To release the antenna from the bracket, pinch the retainers and push it through. It kind of hurts, but it'll go. From underneath the sport cage, there are 2 speaker pod bolts at the crossbar. If you look, there's actually 3. But if you loosen them all, it'll be a little easier to slide the connector out. But you can do it with just 2 of them loose. I didn't see that other bolt at the time, but I got it done. Tighten them back up once the wire is free. With the antenna removed, loosely reinstall the bracket and slide a piece of cardboard between the padding and the bracket. We're going to be doing some precision cutting and we don't want to scratch that bracket. Before we go any further, let's move to the arts and crafts portion of the installation. Go ahead and cut out the templates for the padding as well as for the roof drilling guides. These templates will give you an easy-to-follow guide for the really scary parts of the install. The template is made of heavy paper and cannot be easily torn or distorted. Let there be peace in your hearts. This is a total can-do. These guides work amazingly well, and I'm here for you. Start with the right or passenger front and position the templates so that you're able to feel the bracket under the padding. The template fits the corner of the bracket and aligns with the zipper and padding seams. You can tape the template in place or just hold it and make the cuts where indicated. Holding actually worked pretty well. Leave the padding unzipped and move to the right rear bracket. Slide in the cardboard for backing and position the template along the zipper edge and the joining seams. The only thing to watch for here is to make sure that the template cut line doesn't line up with the zipper. Move the material and template so that the cut is made in the padding and not on the zipper or the seam itself. These cuts don't need to be an exact science. The templates will get you close enough, and there's enough room and movement in the padding for everything to line up. Continue to the left side of the Jeep and run through the same process on the remaining brackets. A sharp cutting utensil makes all the difference in the world, and the cardboard really helps give it a clean cut. Move back to where you started at that right front bracket and remove the base plate. The antenna bracket install is a little tricky and needs to be done in the right order to make everything click. To give you a visual of what will be happening under the padding, here's how the antenna bracket will line up with the sport bar corner bracket. There are 2 holes in the bracket. One hole is used for a mounting bolt and the other hole is only there for a reference for bracket alignment. When it's all said and done, the open hole will align with a hole in the base plate bracket. Before we install the antenna bracket, reposition the corner bracket, slide the antenna bracket into the padding through the perfectly positioned cut that you made earlier. Align the 8mm bolt from the top of the base bracket up through the antenna bracket and tighten it up. The bolt uses a lock nut and the bracket is only there to hold the antenna, so don't get too violent with the torque. Position the antenna mount so that the bracket alignment hole is centered over the hole in the base plate, and install a corner bolt that will ultimately be covered up by that antenna bracket. At this point, the base bracket should be in place and the bolt you just made inaccessible by that antenna bracket should be tight. Don't forget this one. Install the new bracket and loosely install the 3 remaining bolts. These brackets will stay permanently bolted to your sport bar and will support all of the weight from the roof rack and cargo. It doesn't really matter what order we install the remaining brackets. We just continued on to the right rear, removing the 2 outer base mount bolts using that 13mm. Slide the new bracket tabs through the slits in the padding and install the new bracket using the same bolts. The new brackets will only fit where they need to be, so there should be no confusion. The third bolt in the new bracket will be one of the provided 8mm bolts along with one of the black coated washers. Repeat the process on the rear driver's bracket as well, and remaining left front bracket. Leave all the bolts loose for now. We'll tighten them up once we know that the hardtop lines up correctly. Move back to the hardtop, grab a couple of roof mount gaskets out of the parts bag, pull back the rubber molding a little, and slide in the gasket. This will act as a surface for the templates to reference from and give us a perfect front to rear orientation. Using the templates we cut out earlier, lay the drill guides on the hardtop. The templates are designed to lay on top of the outer ribs of the top. Center the template visually for now. We'll get all kinds of exact in a few minutes. The templates are pretty long, so it's obvious if they aren't lying parallel to the roof ribs. When you get them close, throw in a couple of pieces of tape to keep them into place. Alright, it's measure time. Now you can actually do this alone, but a little help holding the tape would really be nice. The template has a center line drawn through all of the holes that we'll be drilling. The distance between the center lines on each template is 43 and 15/16 inches. All we need to do is make sure that we measure 43 and 15/16 both at the front of the hardtop center line and at the rear drill hole center line. If we do that, we know that our templates are perfectly parallel. Because the templates are pushed up against the gaskets that we slid into that hardtop molding, we know that the templates are positioned correctly front to rear. Here's a little trick that guys with measuring skills use to get improved accuracy from their trusty tape measure. Stretch out the measuring tape and you will read that you're very close to our goal of 43 and 15/16 inches. Now the end of your measuring tape has some movement in it, so to take our measurements to the next level, try measuring from the 1 or 2 inch line at the dumb end and ignore the numbers on the smart end of the tape. We know that we have 43 inches. All we care about is making sure that we have exactly the extra 15/16 of an inch. So ignore the inches and focus on those tiny little lines. Try it on both the front and rear center lines through the drill hole guides. When it's exact, tape the templates down and prepare to drill with confidence. Okay, let's do this. Use a sharp center punch and carefully center punch each of the 16 drill points. You may feel the need to double check your measurements. Yeah, feel free. In our instructions, we mentioned a drill that works great on fiberglass. It's called a brad-tipped bit. They work amazingly well, but they're also pretty proud of them price-wise. Here is a multi-purpose drill as well as one of the brad bits. The tips are definitely different. But how much difference do they make drilling through fiberglass? Well, here you go. The big concern was how much fiberglass would chip with a standard bit. It turns out, not much. Then there's the fact that the holes will be completely covered by a gasket and rack mount. Don't get carried away with a ton of pressure as you push through, and you won't have any trouble using a standard drill bit. But I gotta tell you, that brad tip bit works amazing and drops through fiberglass like butter. Yeah, I said that. Drill using an 11/32 bit on the large holes and a 1/4 inch bit on the smaller holes. When you're done, double check that you have drilled all the holes indicated on the templates and remove them. That wasn't even that bad, huh? Break out the bag of parts that will be used for the rail mounts. These brackets will become a permanent part of the hardtop, even when it's removed. There are gaskets and O-rings on every possible opening in the top to eliminate any leakage. You're going to like how this goes together. Start at the front and lay out all the parts as shown. The parts have an offset to them, so make sure they line up with the roof. Each of the bolts will have first a washer, followed by an O-ring, the gaskets will line up with the base of both the upper and lower bracket parts and will sandwich the hardtop, creating a waterproof seal. There's a small hole in the upper bracket that will index with a notch in the gasket to allow for water drainage. Then there's also an O-ring that needs to be positioned at each of the upper through bolt holes in the bracket. That O-ring will be followed by another washer. Make sure the O-rings are lying flat in the bracket groove. And then a T-nut. Loosely start the through bolts into the T-nuts with all of the gaskets and O-rings in place. The rear bracket assemblies have pretty much the same configurations of brackets, O-rings, and washers as the front. Make sure the offset is correct and lightly install the T-nuts. Each of the bolts will have first a washer, followed by an O-ring. The gaskets will line up with the base of both the upper and lower bracket parts and will sandwich the hardtop, creating a waterproof seal. Do the same to the remaining side. Lift the hardtop back onto the Jeep. With the hardtop sitting in place, there's no need to bolt it down yet. Take a look at how the new sport bar brackets meet the mounting parts that you just installed on the hardtop. We discovered that the sport bar tolerances vary from Jeep to Jeep. So we're going to look for gaps between the new sport bar mounts and the new hardtop brackets. In the event that there is a gap, shims are included in your kit. They'll be installed between the two mounts to fill the gap, if any. It isn't an exact measurement thing. Simply slide in as many of the spacers as you need to fill the gaps at any of the brackets. I needed 2 shims on the passenger side rear and 1 on the driver's or left side rear. These shims will help reduce top warpage when the final through bolts are installed and tightened. Our next task is to make sure that we have the top brackets lined up with the sport bar mounting brackets. All the brackets are loose right now, so there should be movement possible. Drop one of the long 8mm bolts into each of the roof mount brackets. These bolts have a design similar to what you have on your OEM top install hardware. They have a thread design that allows for misalignment without crossing the threads. You're welcome. Some bolts will drop right in and start threading into the sport bar brackets. Others may need to be shifted around a little and given a little help until they line up. We haven't permanently installed our spacer shims yet, so just gently tighten the through bolts, enough to hold the sport bar brackets in place while we tighten them. Starting with the front brackets, slide a 13mm end wrench in between the hardtop and the sport bar. Snug up the front mounting bracket bolt enough so that the bracket won't shift when we remove the top to final tighten the remaining sport bar bracket bolts. Repeat the process on the other front bracket. Move to the rear and snug up the two easily accessible bolts on the rear brackets. They'll use a 13 and a 12mm. Carefully remove the hardtop so that the brackets aren't disturbed during removal. Final tighten all of the new bracket sport bar bolts. Peel the backing off the shims and position them on the sport bar brackets so that the center hole is clear. We've waited until we were sure that everything was lined up before final install of the satellite antenna. Route the antenna connector through the large hole in the new bracket, then through the front outside slit in the padding. Push the antenna connector through the large hole in the new bracket, then through the front outside slit in the padding. Push the antenna into the bracket and connect the connector. Zip everything back up and tuck the padding out of the way as needed. Move back to the hardtop and install the main rail and caps. If the T-nuts are loose enough, the main rail will slide over the T-nut. Continue to slide the main rail forward until it captures the front T-nut and the through holes are lined up with the brackets. Now if you're careful and you get this right, you won't ever have any issues taking your top on and off. In fact, top removal will become much easier because you can use the main rails as lift points. We added an extra Torx tool to the kit to help with the rail alignment. So here's the trick. Drop a Torx tool into each of the through holes on the one rail. With the tool in position and able to turn the bolt, shift the rails and brackets around until the tool is perfectly centered in the rail and can be removed and replaced without any problem accessing the bolt and turning it. On the front mount, slide in the front through-hole gasket with the small hole in the gasket oriented to the inside of the top. Sliding in a T-nut into the rail, then adding an O-ring on top of the mount and a washer, then an O-ring on the bolt. Install the front cap rail, only one will fit, and tighten them up using the provided 4mm Allen tool. Grab one of the small flathead screws and start it into the T-nut. Don't get overzealous on these bolts, just good and snug is alright. From under the hard top, access the rear mounting bolts and tighten them up. You now have the technique. Continue on to the remaining end caps. The rear end caps mount similar to the front caps. Loosely install a T-nut and a short flathead cap screw. Slide the T-nut and base bracket into the rail. Install the bolt from inside the top up through the bracket. The O-rings and bracket will hold the bolt in place. Slide a T-nut into the rail, install the end cap trim using a flathead cap screw on the top. The pre-installed nutsert in the cap will be used by the long bolt that's installed from the bottom. Tighten up all the bolts, including the one from under the rail. Now you know why that Allen wrench has such a short end on it. Once again, lift the hardtop on. This is the last time, I promise. With the top sitting in place, move to the top rails and drop the provided Torx tool into the rail and start each of the 4 mounting bolts and tighten them up. These are the only additional bolts you will ever need to remove for hardtop removal. The rails are held in place by the through top brackets, making the rail a perfect lift point for top removal. This concludes this portion of our install. However, if you stepped up for the amazingly versatile, functional, and aesthetically pleasing slat kit upgrade, stay with me for a few more minutes. You can skip this step on a new install, but we're adding slats to a previously installed rack, so we need to remove the end caps. Just remove 1 screw from the top and 1 from underneath of each of the end caps. Slide 2 T-nuts into the outer edges of the slat. The side mounts for the slats are easy to push into the slats if you just start at one edge of the slat and push/roll them on. A straight-on attempt will be just that, an attempt. Do the same thing on both ends, and remember those T-nuts. Loosely install one of the small flathead screws into each of the 2 end cap bolt holes using the T-nuts you previously installed. Do the same on both ends of the slat. The slats are shorter than the rail spacing, so the end caps or mounts can be pushed on or off the slats for adjustment. For a quick gauge to find the correct fitment of the slats, start with the assembly sitting above the rails. We rested the extrusion on the top of the rail and pressed the caps together until it was possible to drop the slat between the rails. Slide in a T-nut before the slat assembly starts into the rail. A little help will make all the difference installing the slats. And loosely install a flat cap screw. Continue sliding the slat assembly in the rail until the remaining T-nut and screw can be loosely installed. With some help, the slats can be pulled into place. And when the slats are all installed, you can space them out to whatever your needs may be. Tighten up all the bolts, including the one from under the rail. We pulled out a tape and measured the gaps between the slats, just so we had even spacing. TeraFlex's Nebo roof rack. The coolest roof rack ever devised by man. You know what? That just looks clean.